you like a quick, surefire recipe for handling worry situations? A technique you can start using right away, before you go any further in reading this book. Now let me tell you about a method that worked out by Willis H. Carrier, a brilliant engineer who launched the air conditioning industry, and who headed the world-famous Carrier Corporation in Syracuse, New York. It is one of the best techniques I've ever heard for solving worry problems, and I got it from Mr. Carrier personally when we were having lunch together one day in the Engineers Club in New York. When I was a young man, Mr. Carrier said, I worked for the Buffalo Forge Company. Forge Company in Buffalo, New York. I was handed the assignment of installing a gas cleaning device in a plant of the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company at Crystal City, Missouri, a plant costing millions of dollars. The purpose of the installation was to remove the impurities from the gas so it could be burned without injuring the engines. This method of cleaning gas was new. It had been tried only once before and under different circumstances. In my work at Crystal City, Missouri, unforeseen difficulties arose. It worked after a fashion, but not well enough to meet the guarantee we had made. I was stunned by my failure. It was almost as if someone had struck me a blow on the head. My stomach, my insides began to twist and turn, and for a while I was so worried I couldn't sleep. Finally, common sense reminded me that worry wasn't going to get me anywhere, so I figured out a way to handle my problem without worrying. It worked superbly. I have been using this same anti-worry technique for more than 30 years. It is simple. Anyone can use it. It consists of 3 steps. Step 1. I analyzed the situation fearlessly and honestly and figured out what was the worst that could possibly happen as a result of this failure. No one was going to jail me or shoot me, and I was certain. True, there was also a chance that I would lose my position, and there was also a chance that my employers would have to remove the machinery and lose the $20,000 we had invested. Step 2. After figuring out what was the worst that could possibly happen, I reconciled myself to accepting it, if necessary. I said to myself, this failure will be a blow to my record, and it might possibly mean the loss of my job. But if it does, I can always get another position. Conditions could be much worse, and as far as my employees are concerned, well, they realize that we are experimenting with a new method of cleaning gas, and if this experience costs them $20,000, they can stand it. They can charge it up to research, for it is an experiment. After discovering the worst that could possibly happen and reconciling myself to accepting it, if necessary, an extremely important thing happened. I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in days. Step 3. From that time on, I calmly devoted my time and energy to trying to improve upon the worst which I had already accepted mentally. I now tried to figure out ways and means by which I might reduce the loss of $20,000 that we faced. I made several tests and finally figured out that if we spent another $5,000 for additional equipment, our problem would be solved. We did this, and instead of the firm losing $20,000, we made $15,000. I probably would have never been able to do this if I had kept on worrying, because one of the worst features about worrying is that it destroys our ability to concentrate. When we worry, our minds jump here and there and everywhere, and we lose all power of decision. However, when we force ourselves to face the worst and accept it mentally, we eliminate all those vague imaginations and put ourselves in a position in which we are able to concentrate on our problem. This incident that I have related occurred many years ago. It worked so superbly that I've been using it ever since, and as a result, my life had been almost completely free from worry. Now, why is Willis H. Carrier's magic formula so valuable and so practical, psychologically speaking? Because it yanks us down out of the gray clouds in which we fumble around when we are blinded by worry. It plants our feet on good and solid on the earth. we know where we stand. And if we haven't solid ground under us, how in creation can we ever hope to think anything through? Professor William James, the father of applied psychology, has been dead since 1910. But if he were alive today, could hear this formula for facing the worst, he would heartily approve of it. How do I know that? Because he told his own students, quote, "Be willing to have it so. Be willing to have it so." He said, because acceptance of what has happened is the first step in overcoming the consequences of any misfortune. The same idea was expressed by Lin Yu-Tang in his widely read book, The Importance of Living. True peace of mind, said this Chinese philosopher, comes from accepting the worst. Psychologically, I think it means a release of energy. That's it, exactly. Psychologically, it means a new release of energy. When we have accepted the worst, we have nothing more to lose, and that automatically means we have everything to gain. After facing the worst, Willis H. Carrier reported, I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in days. From that time on, I was able to think. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yet millions of people have wrecked their lives in angry turmoil because they refused to accept the worst, refused to try to improve upon it, refused to salvage what they could from the wreck. Instead of trying to reconstruct their fortunes, they engaged in a bitter and violent contest with experience and ended up victims of that brooding fixation we know as melancholia. Would you like to see how someone else adopted Willis H. Carrier's magic formula and applied it to his own problem? Well, here is one example of a New York oil dealer who was a student in my classes. I was being blackmailed, the student began. I didn't believe it was possible. I didn't believe it. It could happen outside the movies, but I was actually being blackmailed. What happened was this. The oil company, of which I was the head, had a number of delivery trucks and a number of drivers. At the time, war regulations were strictly in force, and we were rationed on the amount of oil we could deliver to any one of our customers. I didn't know it, but it seemed that a certain of our drivers had been delivering oil short to one of our regular customers and then were selling the surplus to customers of their own. The first inkling I had of these illegitimate transactions was when a man who claimed to be a government inspector came to see me one day and demanded hush money. He had got documentary proof of what our drivers had been doing, and he threatened to turn this proof over to the district attorney's office if I didn't cough up. I knew, of course, that I had nothing to worry about, personally at least, but I also knew that the law says a firm is responsible for the actions of its employees. What's more, I knew that if the case came to court and it was aired to the newspapers, the bad publicity would ruin my business. And I was proud of my business. It had been founded by my father 24 years before. I was so worried I was sick. I didn't eat or sleep for 3 days and nights. I kept going around in crazy circles. Should I pay the money? $5,000, or should I tell this man to go ahead and do his damnedest? Either way, I tried to make up my mind. It ended in nightmare. Then on Sunday night, I happened to pick up the booklet on How to Stop Worrying, which I had been given in my Carnegie class in public speaking. I started to read it and came across the story of Willis H. Carrier faced the worst, it said. So I asked myself, what is the worst that could happen if I refuse to pay up? And these blackmailers turn their records over to the district attorney. The answer was, the ruin of my business. That's the worst that can happen. I can't go to jail. All that can happen is that I shall be ruined by the publicity. Then I said to myself, all right, if my business is ruined, I accept that mentally. What happens next? Well, with my business ruined, I would probably have to look for a job. That wasn't bad. I knew a lot about oil. There were several firms that might be glad to employ me. I began to feel better. The blue funk I'd been in for 3 days and nights began to lift a little. My emotions calmed down, and to my astonishment, I was able to think. was clear-headed enough to face step 3, improve on the worst. As I thought of solutions, an entirely new angle presented itself to me. I told my attorney the whole situation. He might find a way out, which I hadn't thought of. I know it sounds stupid to say this, that it hadn't occurred to me before, but of course I hadn't been thinking. I'd only been worrying. I immediately made up my mind that I would see my attorney first thing in the morning, and then I went to bed and slept like a log. How did it end? Well, the next morning my lawyer told me to go and see the district attorney and tell him the truth. I did precisely that. When I finished, I was astonished to hear the DA say that this blackmail racket had been going on for months, and the man who claimed to be a government agent was a crook wanted by the police. What a relief to hear all this after I had tormented myself for 3 days and nights wondering whether I shall hand over $5,000 to this professional swindler. This experience taught me a lasting lesson. Now, whenever I face a pressing problem that threatens to worry me, I give it what I call the old Willis H. Carrier formula. If you think Willis H. Carrier had troubles, listen. You ain't heard of nothing yet. Here is the story of Earl P. Haney of Winchester, Massachusetts. Here is the story as he told it to me himself on November 17th, 1948, in the Hotel Statler in Boston. Back in the 20s, he said, I was so worried that ulcers began eating the lining of my stomach. One night I had a terrible hemorrhage. I was rushed to the hospital connected with the School of Medicine of the Northwestern University of Chicago. My weight dropped from 175 to 90 pounds. I was so ill, I was warned not to even lift my hand. 3 doctors, including a celebrated ulcer specialist, said my case was incurable. I lived on alkaline powders and a tablespoon of milk, and half milk and half cream every hour. Half and half. A nurse put a rubber tube down into my stomach every night and morning and pumped out the contents. This went on for months. Finally, I said to myself, look here, Earl Haney. If you have nothing to look forward to except a lingering death, you might as well make the most of the little time you have left. You have always wanted to travel around the world before you die, so if you're ever going to do it, you'll have to do it now. When I told my physicians I was going to travel around the world and pump out my own stomach at least twice a day, they were shocked. Impossible! They'd never heard of such a thing. They warned me that if I started around the world, I would be buried at sea. No, I won't, I replied. I've promised my relatives that I will be buried in the family plots at Broken Bow, Nebraska, so I'm going to take my casket with me. I arranged for my casket to be put aboard a ship and then made arrangements with the steamship company in the event of my death to put my corpse in a freezing compartment and keep it there until the liner returned home. I set out on my trip imbued with the spirit of old Omar. Make the most of what we yet may spend, before we too into the dust descend. Dust into dust, and dust to lie. Sans wine, sans song, sans singer, and sans end. The moment I boarded the SS President Adams in Los Angeles and headed for the Orient, I felt better. I gradually gave up my alkaline powders and my stomach pump. I was soon eating all kinds of food, even strange native mixtures and concoctions that were guaranteed to kill me. As the weeks went by, I even smoked long black cigars and drank highballs. I enjoyed myself more than I did in years. We ran into monsoons and typhoons, which should have put me into my casket, if only from fright. But I got an enormous kick out of all this adventure. I played games aboard the ship, sang songs and made friends, and stayed up half the night. When we reached China and India, I realized that the business cares that I had faced back home were paradise compared to the poverty and hunger in the Orient. I stopped all of my senseless worrying and felt fine. When I got back to America, I had gained 90 pounds, and I had almost forgotten I had ever had a stomach ulcer. I had never felt better in my life. I went back to business and haven't been ill a day since. Earl P. Haney told me he realizes now that he was unconsciously using the same principles of Willis H. Carrier used to conquer worry. First, I asked myself, what is the worst that could possibly happen? The answer was death. Second, I prepared myself to accept death. I had to. There was no choice. The doctors said my case was hopeless. And third, I tried to improve the situation by getting the utmost enjoyment out of life for the short time I'd left. If, he continued, if I had gone on worrying after boarding that ship, I have no doubt that I would have made the return voyage inside my coffin. But I relaxed, and I forgot all my troubles. And this calmness of mind gave me a new burst of energy, which actually saved my life. So, rule 2 is, if you have a worry problem, apply the magic formula of Willis H. Carrier by doing these 3 things. 1. Ask yourself, what is the worst that could possibly happen? 2. Prepare to accept it if you have to. And 3. Then calmly proceed to improve on the worst. What worry may do to you. Many years ago, a neighbor rang my doorbell one evening and urged me and my family to be vaccinated against smallpox. He was only one of thousands of volunteers who were ringing doorbells all over New York City. Frightened people stood in line for hours at a time to be vaccinated. Vaccination stations were opened not only in all hospitals but also in firehouses, police precincts, and in large industrial plants. More than 2,000 doctors and nurses worked feverishly day and night vaccinating crowds. The cause of all this excitement? 8 people in New York City had smallpox, and 2 had died. 2 deaths out of a population of almost 8 million. Now, I'd lived in New York for many, many years, and no one had ever yet rung my doorbell to warn me against the emotional sickness of worry. All illness that during the same time period had caused 10,000 times more damage than smallpox. No doorbell ringer has ever warned me that 1 person out of 10 now living in these United States will have a nervous breakdown, induced in the vast majority of cases by worry and emotional conflicts. So I'm writing this chapter to ring your doorbell and warn you. The great Nobel Prize winner in medicine, Dr. Alexis Carrel, said, quote, "Businessmen who do not know how to fight worry die young." And so do housewives, and horse doctors, and bricklayers. A few years ago, I spent my vacation motoring through Texas and New Mexico with Dr. O.F. Gober, one of the medical executives of the Santa Fe Railway. His exact title was Chief Physician of the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe Hospital Association. We got to talking about the effects of worry, and he said 70% of all patients who come to physicians can cure themselves if they only got rid of their fears and worries. Don't think for a moment that I mean that their ills are imaginary, he said. Their ills are as real as a throbbing toothache and sometimes 100 times more serious. I refer to such illnesses as nervous indigestion, some stomach ulcers, heart disturbances, insomnia, some headaches, and some types of paralysis. These illnesses are real. I know what I'm talking about, said Dr. Gober, for I myself suffered from a stomach ulcer for 12 years. Fear causes worry. Worry makes you tense and nervous and affects the nerves of your stomach and actually changes the gastric juices of your stomach from normal to abnormal and often leads to stomach ulcers. Dr. Joseph F. Montague, author of book Nervous Stomach Trouble, says much the same thing. He says, "You do not get stomach ulcers from what you eat. You get ulcers from what is eating you." Dr. W.C. Alvarez of the Mayo Clinic said, "Ulcers frequently flare up or subside according to the hills and valleys of emotional stress." That statement was backed up by a study of 15,000 patients treated for stomach disorders at the Mayo Clinic. 4 out of 5 had no physical basis whatever for the stomach illnesses: fear, worry, hate, supreme selfishness, and the inability to adjust themselves to the world of reality. These were largely the causes of stomach illnesses and stomach ulcers. Stomach ulcers can kill you. According to Life magazine, they now stand 10th in our list of fatal diseases. I recently had some correspondence with Dr. Harold Habine of the Mayo Clinic. He read a paper at an annual meeting of the American Association of Industrial Physicians and Surgeons, saying that he had made a study of 176 business executives whose average age was 44.3 years. He reported that slightly more than a third of these executives suffered from one of three ailments peculiar. I thought it was a particular. Okay, no, it is peculiar. To high tension living, heart disease, digestive tract ulcers, and high blood pressure. Think of it. A third of our business executives are wrecking their bodies with heart disease, ulcers, and high blood pressure before they even reach 45. What price success? And they aren't even buying success. Can any man possibly be a success who is paying for business advancement with stomach ulcers and heart trouble? What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his health? Even if he owned the whole world, he could sleep in only one bed at a time and eat only 3 meals a day. Even a new employee can do that and probably sleep more soundly and enjoy his food more than a high-powered executive. Frankly, I would rather be a carefree person with no responsibility than wreck my health at 45 by trying to run a railroad or a cigarette company. The best-known cigarette manufacturer in the world dropped dead from heart failure trying to take a little recreation in the Canadian woods. He amassed millions and fell dead at 61. He probably traded years of his life for what is called business success. In my estimation, this cigarette executive with all his millions was not half of as successful as my father, a Missouri farmer who died at 89 without a dollar. The famous Mayo brothers declared that more than half of our hospital beds are occupied by people with nervous troubles. Yet when the nerves of these people are studied under a high-powered microscope in post-mortem examination, their nerves, in most cases, are apparently as healthy as the nerves of Jack Dempsey. Their nervous troubles are caused not by a physical deterioration of the nerves, but by the emotions of futility, frustration, anxiety, worry, fear, defeat, and despair. Plato said that, quote, the greatest mistake physicians make is that they attempt to cure the body without attempting to cure the mind. Yet the mind and the body are one and should not be treated separately. It took medical science 2,300 years to recognize this great truth. We are just now beginning to develop a new kind of medicine called psychosomatic medicine, a medicine that treats both the mind and the body. It is high time we're doing that, for medical science has largely wiped out the terrible diseases caused by physical germs such as smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, and scores of other scourges that swept untold millions into untimely graves. But medical science has been unable to cope with the mental and physical wrecks caused not by germs, but by emotions of worry, fear, hate, frustration, and despair. Casualties caused by these emotional diseases are mounting and spreading with catastrophic rapidity. 1 out of every 6 of our young men called up by the draft in the Second World War was rejected for psychiatric reasons. What causes insanity? No one knows all the answers, but it is highly probable that in many cases fear and worry are contributing factors. The anxious and harassed individual who is unable to cope with the harsh world of reality breaks off all contact with his environment and retreats into a private dream world of his own making, and this solves his worry problems. I have on my desk a book by Dr. Edward Podolsky entitled Stop Worrying and Get Well. Here are some of the chapter titles in that book. What worry does to the heart. High blood pressure is fed by worry. Rheumatism can be caused by worry. Worry less for your stomach's sake. How worry can cause a cold. Worry and the thyroid. And the worrying diabetic. Another illuminating book about worry is Man Against Himself by Dr. Carl Menninger, one of the Mayo brothers of psychiatry. Dr. Menninger's book will not give you any rules about how to avoid worry, but it'll give you a startling revelation of how we destroy our bodies and minds by anxiety, frustration, hatred, resentment, rebellion, and fear. You'll probably find a copy in your public library. Worry can make even the most stolid person ill. General Grant discovered that during the closing days of the Civil War. The story goes like this. Grant had been besieging Richmond for 9 months. General Lee's troops, ragged and hungry, were beaten. Entire regiments were deserting at a time. Others were holding prayer meetings in their tents, shouting, weeping, and seeing visions. The end was close. Lee's men set fire to the cotton and tobacco warehouses in Richmond and burned the arsenal and fled from the city at night while towering flames roared up in the darkness. Grant was in hot pursuit, banging away at the Confederates from both sides in the rear while Sheridan's cavalry was heading them off in the front, tearing up railway lines and capturing supply trains. Grant, half blind with a violent sick headache, fell behind his army and stopped at a farmhouse. Quote, I spent the night, he records in his memoirs, in bathing my feet in hot water and mustard, and putting mustard plasters on my wrists and the back part of my neck, hoping to be cured by morning. The next morning he was cured instantaneously. And the thing that cured him was not the mustard plaster, but a horseman galloping down the road with a letter from Lee saying he wanted to surrender. When the officer bearing the message reached me, Grant wrote, I was still suffering with a sick headache, but the instant I saw the contents of the note, I was cured. Obviously, it was Grant's worries, tensions, and emotions that made him ill. He was cured instantly the moment his emotions took on the hue of confidence, achievement, and victory. 17 years later, Henry Morgenthau, Junior Secretary of Treasury of FDR's cabinet, discovered that worry could make him so ill that he was dizzy. He records in his diary that he was terribly worried when the president, in order to raise the price of wheat, bought 4,400,000 bushels in one day. He says in his diary, I felt literally dizzy while the whole thing was going on. I went home and went to bed for 2 hours after lunch. If I want to see what worry does to people, I don't have to go to a library or a physician. I can look out of the window of my home where I'm writing this book, and I can see within one block one house where worry caused nervous breakdown, another house where a man worried himself into diabetes. When the stock market went down, the sugar in his blood and urine went up. When Montaigne, the illustrious French philosopher, was elected mayor of his town, Bordeaux, he said to his fellow citizens, I am willing to take your affairs into my hands, but not into my liver and lungs. This neighbor of mine took the affairs of the stock market into his bloodstream and almost killed himself. If I want to be reminded of what worry does to people, I don't need to look at my neighbors' houses. I can look at this very room where I'm writing now and be reminded that the former owner of this house worried himself into an untimely grave. Worry can put you into a wheelchair with rheumatism and arthritis. Dr. Russell Cecil, a world-recognized authority on arthritis, has listed 4 of the most commonest conditions that bring on arthritis. Number 1, marital shipwreck. 2, financial disaster and grief. 3, loneliness and worry. And 4, long-cherished resentments. Naturally, these 4 emotional situations are far from being the only causes of arthritis. There are many different kinds of arthritis due to various causes, but to repeat, the most commonest conditions that bring on arthritis are the 4 listed by Dr. Russell Cecil. For example, a friend of mine was so hard hit during the Depression that the gas company shut off the gas and the bank foreclosed the mortgage on his house. His wife suddenly had a painful attack of arthritis, and in spite of medicine and diets, the arthritis continued until the financial situation improved. Worry can even cause tooth decay. Dr. William McGonigal said in an address before the American Dental Association that, quote, unpleasant emotions caused by worry, fear, and nagging may upset the body's calcium balance and cause tooth decay. Dr. McGonigal told of a patient who had always had a perfect set of teeth until he began to worry over his wife's sudden illness. During the 3 weeks she was in the hospital, he developed 9 cavities. Cavities brought on by worry. Have you ever seen a person with an acutely overactive thyroid? I have, and I can tell you, they tremble, they shake, they look like someone half scared to death, and that's about what it amounts to. The thyroid gland, the gland that regulates the body, has been thrown out of kilter. It speeds up the heart. The whole body is roaring away at full blast like a furnace with all of its drafts wide open. And if this isn't checked by operation or treatment, the victim may die, may burn himself out. Some time ago, I went to Philadelphia with a friend of mine who suffered from this condition. We consulted Dr. Israel Bram, a famous specialist who has been treating this type of ailment for 38 years. Here's the advice he had hanging on the wall of his waiting room, painted on a large wooden sign. I copied it down on the back of an envelope while I was waiting. Relaxation and recreation. The most relaxing, recreating forces are healthy religion, sleep, music, and laughter. Have faith in God, learn to sleep well, love good music, and see the funny side of life. And health and happiness will be yours. The first question he asked this friend of mine was, what emotional disturbance brought you to this condition? He warned my friend that if he didn't stop worrying, he could get other complications, heart trouble, stomach ulcers, or diabetes. All of these diseases, said the eminent doctor, are cousins. First, cousins. When I interviewed film star Meryl O'Byrne, she told me that she refused to worry because she knew that worry would destroy her chief asset on the motion picture screen, her good looks. Quote, when I first tried to break into the movies, she told me, I was worried and scared. I had just come from India, and I didn't know anyone in London, where I was trying to get a job. I saw a few producers, but none of them hired me, and had little money, and I began to give out. For 2 weeks, I lived on nothing but crackers and water. I was not only worried now, I was hungry. I said to myself, maybe you're a fool. Maybe you will never break into the movies. After all, you have no experience. You've never acted at all. What have you to offer but a rather pretty face? I went to the mirror, and then I looked into the mirror, and I saw that what worry was doing to my looks. I saw the lines it was forming. I saw the anxious expression. So I said to myself, you've got to stop this at once. You can't afford to worry. The only thing you have to offer at all is your looks, and worry will ruin them. Few things can age and sour a woman and destroy her looks as quickly as worry. Worry curdles, the expression, makes us clench our jaws and lines our face with wrinkles. It forms a permanent scowl. It may turn the hair gray, and in some cases even make it fall out. It can ruin the complexion. It can bring on all kinds of skin rashes, eruptions, and pimples. Heart disease is the #1 killer in America today. During the Second World War, almost 1/3 of 1 million men were killed in combat. But during the same period, heart disease killed 2 million civilians, and 1 million of those casualties were caused by the kind of heart disease that is brought on by worry and high-tension living. Yes, heart disease is one of the chief reasons why Dr. Alexis Carrel said, "Businessmen who do not know how to fight worry die young." "The Lord may forgive us our sins," said William James, "but the nervous system never does." Here's a startling and almost incredible fact. More Americans commit suicide each year than die from the 5 most common communicable diseases. Why? The answer is largely worry. When the cruel Chinese warlords wanted to torture their prisoners, they would tie their prisoners' hands and foot and put them under a bag of water that constantly dripped, 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 day and night. These drops of water constantly falling on the head finally became like a sound of hammer blows and drove men insane. This same method of torture was used during the Spanish Inquisition and in German concentration camps under Hitler. Worry is like the constant drip, drip, drip of water, and the constant drip, drip, drip of worry often drives men to insanity and suicide. When I was a country lad in Missouri, I was half scared to death by listening to Billy Sunday describe the hellfires of the next world, but he never mentioned the hellfires of physical agony that worriers may have to face here and now. For example, if you are a chronic worrier, you may even be stricken someday with one of the most excruciating pains ever endured by man, angina pectoris. Do you love life? Do you want to live long and enjoy good health? Here is how you can do it. I'm quoting Dr. Alexis Carrel again. He said, "Those who keep the peace of their inner selves in the midst of the tumult of the modern city are immune from nervous diseases." Can you keep the inner peace? Speaking Kung Fu Panda. Great movie, by the way. They have a lot of this motivational stuff. I watched it recently, like, oh, that's applicable. That's applicable. Oh my God. Got off track there. Okay. Can you keep the peace of your inner self in the midst of the tumult of the modern city? If you're a normal person, the answer is yes. Emphatically yes. If you're a normal person, oh yeah. Most of us are stronger than we realize. We have inner resources that we have probably never tapped. As Thoreau said in his immortal book Walden, quote, "I know of no more encouraging fact the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by conscious endeavor. If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life he has imagined, he will meet with his success, unexpected and common hours." That's a good quote. Should I read it again? I'll read it again because I don't think you'll push the 15 seconds back button. "I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by conscious endeavor." Sound familiar? If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life he has imagined, he will meet with success on unexpected and common hours. Surely, many of the readers of this book have as much willpower and as many inner resources as has Olga K. Jarvie of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She discovered that under the most tragic circumstances, she could banish worry. I firmly believe that you and I can also, if we apply the old truths discussed in this volume. Here is Olga K. Jarvie's story as she wrote it for me. Quote, 8.5 years ago, I was condemned to die a slow, agonizing death of cancer. The best medical brains of the country, the Mayo brothers, confirmed the sentence. I was at a dead-end street. The ultimate gaped at me. I was young. I did not want to die. In my desperation, I phoned my doctor at Kellogg and cried out to him the despair in my heart. Rather impatiently, he upbraided me. What's the matter, Olga? Haven't you any fight in you? Sure, you will die if you keep on crying. Yes, the worst has overtaken you. Okay, face the facts. Quit worrying, and then do something about it. Right then and there, I took an oath too solemn that the nails sank deep into my flesh and cold chills ran down my spine. I am not going to worry. I am not going to cry. And if there is anything to mind over matter, I'm going to win. I am going to live. The usual amount of x-ray in such advanced cases was at the time 10.5 minutes a day for 30 days. They gave me x-ray for 14.5 minutes a day for 49 days. And although my bones stuck out of my emaciated body like rocks on a barren hillside, and although my feet were like lead, I did not worry. Not once did I cry. I smiled. Yes, I actually forced myself to smile. I'm not so idiotic as to imagine that merely smiling can cure cancer, but I do believe that a cheerful mental attitude helps the body fight disease. At any rate, I experienced one of the miracle cures of cancer. I have never been healthier than I have in the last few years thanks to those challenging, fighting words. Face the facts. Quit worrying, then doing something about it. That's actually from the last chapter, Rule 2, right? We'll go over that rule here in a second. I'm going to close this chapter by repeating this title, the words of Dr. Alexis Carrel. Those who do not know how to fight worry die young. The followers of the Prophet Muhammad often have verses from the Quran tattooed on their breast. I would like to have the title of this chapter tattooed on the breast of every reader of this book. Those who do not know how to fight worry die young. Was Dr. Carrel speaking to you? Could be. All right, part 1 in a nutshell. So that was part 1. This is just a recap of chapters 1, 2, and 3. Rule 1. If you want to avoid worry, do what Sir William Osler did. Live in daytime compartments. Don't stew about the future. Just live each day until bedtime. Rule number 2. Next time trouble, with a capital T, backs you into a corner, try the magic formula of Willis H. Carrier. Ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen if I can't solve my problem? B. Prepare yourself mentally to accept the worst, if necessary. And then C. Then calmly try to improve upon the worst, which you have already mentally agreed to accept. And Rule 3 from this chapter, remind yourself of the exorbitant price you can pay for worry in terms of your health. Those who do not know how to fight worry die young. And you can find that at the bottom in the comment description, not the comment section, the description. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed part 1. Part 2 is next.